So we're halfway through the growing season and already I'm thinking about next year. We've had some ups and downs this year on our growing. Our plot that we've had for just over a year has been brilliant. No major issues with this side, apart from the allium leaf miner. Which, yeah, it sucks, but it happens, and it seems to have happened to an awful lot of people this year. Whereas the other plot, well, the other plot that we took on late last year and only just started growing on this year has been a real disappointment in a lot of places. Now, you've probably seen previous videos where we've had issues with our potatoes, and yes, they're still growing, but really, really patchy. Now, this could be down to simply the soil is really crappy draining. If you go down a foot or so into that bed, it's a real hardcore crust where it's extremely hard to break down. So I think potatoes in the ground, we're not going to do the same as we have done this year, next year. And it's been pretty hit and miss with the soil quality as well. But we've planted what we could on here just to get what we could out of this plot for this year, and then decide whether, one, we're going to keep the plot, two, what we're going to grow and what did work and what didn't work, and how we want to approach it, because eventually I don't want to deal with any digging on this site. I want to turn it into no dig. The no dig side, loads less issues than I have on the dug site. So this is what I'm looking at doing if we do keep on this one side of the plot. But today, on the no dig side, I'm going to think about creating new beds. Now, I'm creating as much of our own compost as possible, but it always amazes me how much compost you make, how much it actually sinks down before it's actually ready to use. So what came to be a full bin 4 times over, then dropped to half the bin when it was turned, and now, after a couple of months of it being turned, it's now about a quarter full. So we need to carry on making as much compost as possible, because I have some big plans, and if I can help it, I don't want to spend any money. So we need to make as much as we can ourselves to cut down costs, because I know there's definitely going to be about 4 new beds on this no dig side. In those beds, in one of the lot of beds, I want to replant my rhubarb, and I want to put some other fruit bushes along there as well, which I'll show you in a minute, my ideas on that side. We're also really fortunate to be able to have as much horse manure as we want. Now, we haven't brought any onto site at the moment, and I know it's got nettles in it. But to be honest, nettles we can pick out. We pick out nettles out of our no-dig beds anyway, which was in the ground previously. So eventually it kind of gives up. And if you grab it while it's small, it's no major issue. It's just nutrients, which then can just go back onto the compost bin or thrown on top of the bed, depending on what time of year it is. So we are going to start bringing in quite a lot of horse manure to go onto the no dig beds. Again, because this is free, this will reduce our costs massively with our no dig beds, and we might be able to create a little bit more than I was hoping. Now, with this overall shot that I'm going to show you of our no dig side, there's a lot of paths. Now, there's a reason there's a lot of paths. It's because I'm extremely unsteady on my feet and I fall over very, very easy. I lose my balance, so I needed something that was a little bit more stable to walk on than, say, grass that was dipping or anything like that. But we've ended up with a lot more paths than what maybe we need, and some of the beds are a little bit narrow for my liking, because what you find with no dig beds, for a while at least, the edges of your no dig beds are not always strong growth, whereas the middles and towards those edges you'll get some really good growth. So doing it too narrow in the first place is really going to restrict your growing. So I want to rectify that on some of the beds that we created earlier this year. I also want to create one long bed up along the neighbour's fence. I want to create some new beds, so for me to get an idea first to see of what sizes I can get away with, so I don't lose too many pathways, and so we can access as much as we can through those pathways. I'm going to use these pegs and string. Now this will help me mark out and give me an idea of what size beds I can fit in where. Now on this area you can see the path in between the two beds. I'm actually going to fill this path with compost. I'm going to make this bed a lot bigger than what it is, a lot wider. I'll scrape away the wood chip and actually fill it in, and this will give us a massive area of growing. Now I'm not bothered about walking on my no-dig beds. I've found that it causes no issues whatsoever, and yes, having such a wide bed can be a giant pain in the backside, but I want to get the most out of my growing space, because if I do give up the other side, I want to create as much space as I can in this area while still being able to access what I need. But I think making these two beds join, that's a lot of growing space that I can actually fit if I remove this path. So that's one area that I'm going to create a no-dig bed with. This is the other area I'm going to create a no-dig bed, right next to our squashes. Well, one of our squash beds. Obviously at the moment it's a massive mound of wood chip. This is stuff to replace on the paths, places where it's getting a little bit thin or it needs refreshing, or areas where we want to create new paths. Extend this particular squash bed out to this whole area. Now we have another area where I want to add more no-dig beds. Now this could cause us a little bit more issues because it's the pathway on the one side of where our allotment is. But to be honest, we hardly ever use it. And having to come down the side paths and then turning around to go back is not really a big issue. But I think this area would be perfect for our rhubarbs, maybe fruit bushes, more of our perennial plants that we can actually grow here. Now we do have a lot of bindweed in this area, and we are just digging out as we go along. So I think what we would do if we were building it here, instead of just putting compost straight onto the soil, which is what I would probably do in most of the other areas, I'm going to literally double or even triple the cardboard layer for the manure and the compost to go on. Again, I'll have to have a think about it. Jamie's not keen on it at all, but I'll get what I want eventually anyway. I'll make sure I moan enough to be able to do it. I just think it's a wasted space. It's a wasted area that we have to keep weeding for actually no additional benefit. So I would just rather be able to get more in and actually produce something than to just have comfrey and bindweed come through. I'm also thinking of extending some of the existing larger beds, either lengthways or widthways. Now the cabbage bed, the main large brassica bed, that was dug over. It was clay soil, but we've just put on about 6 inches of manure on top of it in the winter. So technically it kind of is this year no dig. We're not doing any digging in it, we're just removing the weeds. And when I replant my winter brassicas, ones that will be in there through the winter months when we're likely to be putting compost on, I want to try and plant them all in one area. Even though you can mulch around these cabbages, it's not an issue. I want to give it a really good mulch with compost and manure for next year's growing season. I've noticed really good growth in that brassica bed since we added so much manure. Now we do have to be careful about how big we make our beds, because you still need to be able to get around. We need to be able to get around with a wheelbarrow. We need to be able to kneel on the bed sometimes on the pathways to actually get into the beds, either for planting or weeding. But I would rather try and cram as much as I can out of this as possible, because it's all about growing space. And I would rather focus my time as much on the no-dig side than I would do on the other side at the moment, until we can guarantee that that is going to stay in our hands. Wasting homemade compost on an area that we don't know what's going to happen with, in my eyes, it's when we desperately need it for new beds on this side. it's a no-brainer really. Now, we did have ideas about building another polytunnel, and if it is a new polytunnel, it will go where the Jerusalem artichokes are and the corn for this year, and would have to figure out a new bed for those elsewhere. But because of the way we've got our allotment, we probably wouldn't have space to grow as much if I did get another polytunnel, because the chicken run does take up a lot of room. But I think we can jig things around and actually see what we can actually build. Now, yes, some might argue that our compost bins take up so much room, but we couldn't have grown anything down there because of the amount of bramble that comes through. It's massive amount of rubble and glass, and even could be other stuff that is not good to go. The council was still pulling asbestos deep from underground when we actually came onto this site. So I'd rather not use that area for actual physical growing. Now, the compost isn't in contact with any of that at all, but I'm happy for my compost bays. And to be honest, I think the most important thing on a no-dig site is your compost, and creating enough of a compost bay to be able to get as much free compost as you possibly can. But if you are interested in keeping up with any of that, on how we're going to do our no-dig beds and expand the beds, if you like and subscribe, you'll have notifications to let you know when we do upload any new videos. And hopefully, you never know, you may get a tip or two. But I better crack on and get on with some of this work.